Ladies and gentlemen, prepare for, let's just say, some midnight dynamite. I can assure you, I'll get the wheels in motion very shortly. I promise I won't blow my fuse. And don't close your eyes because our guest here is a part of one of the most influential bands of all time, and especially if you're from the Maryland area. The band Kicks, who on September of 2023, September the 17th, had their final show, and boy, was it one to remember in front of nearly 15,000 fans. We'll talk about that. We'll also talk about what's next here for one of the most influential members of the band. We'll talk about also maybe a little band Rhino Bucket that's playing a Kicks Fan Fest. We'll also maybe talk about is there any other music out there and what's next? And I don't know. Who knows? Whatever else. And maybe I'll even go down memory lane, talk about a moment or two, talk about, I don't know, something he wants to forget, something he wants to remember. I don't know. Whatever else. But since we do things a little different, I know that our guest has done countless show after countless show, but since I'm actually big here in the wrestling world, and we've most recently had not one but two WWE wrestlers on here recently, I am going to give our guest an introduction that he may or may not want to ever remember he did this podcast, but I'll certainly make sure that this will be one, well, let's just say in the words of Michael Buffer, let's get ready to rumble. But after all, since we're here in prime time on the brightest lights, the biggest stage, and the platform that usually where it's all wrestling matters, but it's all music matters. And again, the irony of our guest being on here is in the last month and a half, I've had on three former Atlantic Records artists, King's X, Doug Pinnick, Randy Jackson, Zebra, and of course, Mr. Brian Damage Forsythe. No, I'm not going to talk about how great Atlantic Records was because, well, we don't want to talk about that. We want to most certainly talk about the iconic band Kicks, who had some of the most influential albums, certainly of the mid to late 1980s. Again, Midnight Dynamite, which of course was remastered a few years back and remixed. Also, Blow My Fuse, which went, by the way, only platinum. Don't close my eyes. Went number 11 on the Billboard Hot 100, certified gold. And their most recent album, by the way, which I was a pretty big fan of, actually, Rock Your Face Off, only debuted in the Billboard Top 50. And their most recent live documentary, only number one on the Billboard music chart. Ladies and gentlemen, you're waiting for it. He's like, let's get this show on the road. And yeah, I'll make sure we do it because I got plenty of hot wire to go to. So, ladies and gentlemen, let's now introduce our guest and give him that introduction, which I can assure you he'll remember this one for a lifetime. So, ladies and gentlemen, let's get to it on the platform where all music matters on Sportswire Radio, the number one global radio station. So, with that, without further ado, here on the Sports Report, number one global sports show, one of the most influential guitarists of all time, from the legendary band Kicks, and also from Rhino Bucket. His name is simply put, Brian Damage Forsythe. Bang, bang, balls of fire. My friend, how are we doing?
Great. I
Yeah, I
love
figured
you.
Yeah,
I
I
love
figured.
the intros.
Yeah, it's funny. I had Doug Pinnick compare my voice to James Hetfield of Metallica. Randy Jackson of Zebra looked at me and thought that was interesting. And I have had two WWE wrestlers. I'm not going to ask you about the WWE. And they were like, I feel like I want to run through a wall right now and go back into WrestleMania. So it's been an interesting last couple of months, but we've been having a lot of success with these. I want to thank Red String Music for the opportunity to put us in touch with you. And you have obviously been certainly at the center of a lot of things. And since I know that you're a very busy man, plus I got a surprise for you. You do these all the time, but I actually have something for you and the band Kicks, which I'm sure you'll certainly be like, wow, you know what? I'm surprised somebody hadn't done that for us already, but I'll get to that shortly. But for those that are listening and watching here in prime time on the brightest lights, the biggest stage, the platform where now all music matters, the platform that you, Mr. Brian Damage, Forsythe, and Kicks most certainly helped build. Here's Sportzwire Radio. I see you have a gig here coming up in September, a Kicks Fan Fest, and Rhino Bucket is at the head of it, I see.
Yeah, yeah. Um, they did the first one last year, and I said, well, that'd be a perfect gig for Rhino Bucket because we're not quite Kick status, and so we had our agent book us on that, so that should be fun.
What's that like, getting in front of all these Kicks fans again? Because the Kicks fan base is so devoted, so loyal, but, it gives you an opportunity to go out there. What's that like to be able to go out there again and see a lot of these fans that, I mean, they saw you every chance they got?
Well, we just got done doing the Monsters of Rock cruise.
I saw that, yeah.
So we had Kicks fans on that, but we haven't really returned to that. Rhino Bucket hasn't returned to the East Coast for a few years. So
I know you're in Nashville now, so you're probably not traveling as much across the country. So it's probably this gives you guys an opportunity to, like you said, connect with a lot of the fans that have been wanting to see you. Maybe.
Yeah, and this is, I mean, a Kicks Fan Fest is just Kicks fans, instead of a ship full of everybody.
Yeah, I'm not going to ask you about some of the things of the Monsters of Rock if you've been following. I'm going to certainly leave that at that. Thankfully, I'm not Ricky Rackman, but I mean, do you want to play more gigs now at Rhino Bucket? Obviously, we'll get into Kicks in a minute or two, but do you want to go out there and play more with Rhino Bucket?
Well, yeah, because when I first joined them, it was while Kicks wasn't happening.
Yeah.
It was back in 2000. So I had all kinds of free time to devote to Rhino Bucket. And then Kicks started up again, and I completely got, busy with Kicks. We would do a European tour like once a year, like during January or February, because Kicks, it was kind of downtime for Kicks. So now that
because you guys would always play like in the spring and summer. That makes sense.
Yeah, so now I'm like wide open, so I got nothing else.
Nah, you know what? I mean, why not? I mean, obviously Rhino Bucket gets, definitely always had a European fan base. You guys were always, certainly, again, a different thing. And I see Ronnie's got his band also out there. So it's almost like a mini Kicks reunion. I mean, it's kind of it's kind of interesting that way how it's set up.
Yeah. Because Ronnie will be there, Jimmy will be there because he's playing with Bob Perry's son, and so three of the Kicks guys will be at this fan fest.
That's pretty cool. That's pretty cool that everybody's out there and is still doing different things. And how are some of the band members' health? I mean, obviously we know it's well documented. I know Ronnie's going through things. It was great to see him at the final show. Jimmy's certainly gone through some things. And how are they doing health wise?
They seem to be doing good. Yeah, that's the reason we kind of one of the reasons we retired, because Jimmy, he had a couple of heart attacks, and every time we'd go on a road, his wife would worry about him. So he had to give it up. And but now he does like these side projects, little things here and there, and he seems to be able to handle those. And as far as anyone else's, Steve uh, was
Steve's
dealing.
doing Steve's doing a podcast now. I mean, actually, Steve's doing a podcast. I'll just leave that at that. But he's
It
now
was,
become in
yeah,
this world now. Yeah, he's really it's really interesting. I mean, he certainly made some news recently about talking about Poison. Obviously, they opened for you guys, all those years ago, and he was certainly vocal about certain things, and he's certainly done well for himself with that. The auction, obviously, certainly with some news out there, but it's great to see that you guys are out there still doing it, and it's great to see that there's a Kicks Fan Fest where people can see some of the band coming up, and and that's going to take place on September the 20th in the Waynesboro Moose Picnic Grounds. I had put the poster up, but I'll put it back up in a little while, and it's only a $20 donation at the door. People think about, going to the movies, going to dinner, and you spend way more on that. So just come out and hang out with Kicks fans and check out some of the guys. They have a killer set, and they'll play a lot of your favorites and different things in between. And we'll put up some social media links up here shortly in a second. But, I was wondering this question, and I hadn't really seen anybody ask you this. I know that we had a remix version of Blow My Fuse. I know Midnight Dynamite, the same thing a few years back. But is there anything in the vault of any unreleased songs out there? Or I know there was also some talk about Hotwire maybe being remixed. Is there anything that's in the vault or any updates on any other albums that might be remixed? Do you know of anything about that with Kicks?
No, I don't really know. I know there's, I just did that rockin' pod this past weekend, and I was asked that question. There's a bootleg demo, a collection of demos called Thunderground, and
Okay.
somebody wanted to know if we were going to officially release that. Oh no, it was the guy that does that kind of thing. I guess he has a label or something, and he wanted to know if 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 I was interested in releasing it. And I said, well, those aren't my songs. Uh, they're mostly Donnie's songs, and they're just demos, And I said you'd have to ask him, because I can't, I don't have any say in that.
Sure, sure. Because I think there was some talk. I know during COVID about Hotwire maybe, because I know Bo had worked on those
Right.
albums, which was I thought was so fascinating that Bo Hill, of course, who was the producer of Midnight Dynamite, who also did some stuff with Rat, who obviously you guys had quite a history with, and he wound up remixing Blow My Fuse when it was Tom Werman that produced that album. It was, ironically enough, I didn't even realize that was Tom's last platinum album he produced. I mean, you ironically were the last. Yeah, I saw this stat the other day, and you were the last platinum album that Tom Werman produced, but it was Bo that remixed the album, which I could, as a bass player, one of the things I noticed about that album, which I really appreciated, which I noticed a lot more, especially on Rock Your Face Off, is that I could hear a more of a lot less of a quieter sound. I could hear the instruments fully. There was definitely a major, like one of the things I always thought that lacked with Blow My Fuse was there was just like, I don't know, like a quiet kind of sound, if that makes sense. There was just the bass almost sounded like it was just not there, but it really, as a former musician, I could hear that it was such of a way better mix, and I think it carried over into Rock Your Face Off, which was your most recent album back in 2014. I know Mark had talked about that with the remix version of Blow My Fuse, and I thought that was really something I appreciated with the remix version, at least of Blow My Fuse and such. If you wanted to talk about that for a minute or two.
Yeah, it was kind of a quiet mix.
It's just weird. It was just like, I don't know, like it was just something like, I mean, I don't know if it was, I don't think it was just that like 1988 we're producing, but it was just such a much better version. And I think that the music, at least on your last album, it kind of carried over, because one of the things I noticed on Rock Your Face Up was like, we got some bass. We got a bass solo in there in a couple of the songs. I hear the bass right in there. It was like, all right, this is Kicks. There we go. So thank God for Mark Schenker. Who would have thought I would have said that?
Yeah, he's a lot louder bass player than.
I was, as a former bass player, I was like, here, all right, this is why Kicks is back.
Yeah. Well, when Bo did blow my, I mean, did the Midnight Dynamite, uh, one of the things that one of the things in the 80s was the effects. Like there was all these effects on the drums,
Yeah.
and so when he remixed Midnight Dynamite, he made it was a drier mix. And when you dry things out, they come up front. And so he said he was the one that suggested doing Blow My Fuse as well. And there's but they always put all this echo and reverb,
Yeah.
and like the one thing that stood out was the beginning of Blow My Fuse. Or no, it was Cold Blood.
Yeah.
The guitars,
The video. Yeah.
if you had headphones on, it was kind of like like this weird echo, and it wasn't even.
Yeah, there was just like I don't know what I don't want to use the term unevenness, but there was definitely something that like I think in the 30-year anniversary version, I think it fixed it and it sounded for a lot better version. And I just think for the ear, and I would imagine for the Kicks fan as well. I mean, I'm sure I'm speaking for a lot of them. It just sounded like a much better sonically version of what you guys put out there. And I think it, I know you did Rock Your Face Off first, but I think it really carried over and, into the, what the band put out there, most recently. And I just think that was really something that, it was good to hear all of the instruments and everything just, with the flow. And Bo added something different. Let me ask you one more question, Bo. I know I only have so much time with you, but do you think the album would have been different if Bo would have produced Blow My Fuse? I know Tom had done Stay Hungry. He did all the big Motley albums. I know he had such a connection. But if Bo had produced that album instead of Werman, do you think that album would have had a difference in the sonic result or commercial result? What's your thoughts on that?
I know it would have sounded different. I mean, it's hard to tell what would have happened, but
Yeah.
I don't know. I think Tom, at that point in our career, Tom was the perfect guy for us, especially for Ronnie and I, because I don't know, he was really encouraging with the guitars, and and mixing the guitars. He had a way of mixing, like when a solo came up, like he didn't just let the solo play, he'd ride it. And like when you slide your hand down on across the frets or something, he'd catch it and he'd pull it up, and it just gave it a lot more umph.
Well, he had listen. If you think about Stay Hungry, that was Twisted was a 2 guitar band, so he was used to that 2 guitar sound. You guys had that, so I think that gave him an ear to say, okay, let's put this together. Let's put these songs out there, and I think it showed on the results of the album. I mean, there's no question about that. And again, just so fascinating that Bo, produces the remixed version of it. As we're here with Brian Damage Forsythe. My name is the Reverend Tom Bryce, your voice figuratively living now. All Music Matters Sports Web Radio. If you're here, like, share, and subscribe this video. We're here for a few more minutes with, of course, the legendary Mr. Brian Damage Forsythe of the band Rhino Bucket and also Kicks. I'd like to ask you this question because I don't hear you get it asked a lot. I get a lot of wrestlers on the platform. I mentioned we had some WWE guys on here. I get a lot of young and up and coming people that come on here. If you had advice for anybody, whether it's in anything they're doing, could be music, could be sports, whatever it might be, because you've had obviously an interesting story in your own life, what advice would you give to somebody here in terms of going on their craft and trying to make the most of it?
Well, the most obvious advice I would say it would be, follow your heart, don't give up, and don't follow the trends. Like, create the trends.
Yeah, that's a good point. No, because you know what? I mean, you guys, you guys did that. Obviously with Kicks, the last show. I know people ask you all the time, oh, you guys will come back, and I know Steve has been, extremely emphatic about that. But I actually think you guys couldn't have went out on a better note. All these bands now, a few weeks ago, it's now comes out that, Gene and Paul are going to do a Kiss thing without the makeup. And, Motley Crue famously signed a contract. They're playing now without Mick Mars. I mean, Judas Priest, a band you opened for a bunch of times, is playing, and it's practically the only real original member of the band. I think at this point is, Ian Hill. I mean, we can keep going. Glenn sort of is in the band, but you guys went out and you went out in front of your home territory.
Hmm.
Almost 15,000 people are there. September 17, 2023. I mean, to me, you can't write a better story. I have a lot of wrestlers that come on. We always talk about in wrestling, the likes of Ric Flair. They can't stop wanting to wrestle. We had all these big names that come on here from WWE, and it's always like, okay, yeah, never say never. They'll come out. But I really feel like with what you guys did on that last show, that emotion, the fan base that was there in the pouring rain, like I don't think you could have went out any way better. That's kind of the way I think.
Yeah, I mean that was our plan. Well, Steve came up with a plan because he wanted out. He was, his voice, even though you couldn't tell when you hear him live, he was struggling with a few things, and it- we talked about it. We had like a Zoom meeting with the whole band, and we talked about it, and he said, he didn't want to be one of those old guys, because we do all these shows with bands that have been around forever, and there's some of them that should have quit a long time ago, and we
Yeah.
didn't want one of those bands. We wanted to go out like while we still had a little bit.
And how many bands? Oh, listen, there's a lot of bands you tour from still, in the '80s, and you guys go out in front of almost 15,000 people. I mean, no band's gonna get a chance to say that. You guys got that. To me, it's almost like there's no way you could top what you guys did. I mean, no, all respect in the world to a lot of these bands. Piercy and D Martini are doing shows together. We talked about Motley. I mean, I know Kip Winger's now talking about sort of a final thing. He's going region to region. But I think what Kix did, going in front of almost 15,000 people in your home place, practically selling out, and having a show when Ronnie's back for a few songs, you get Brad back. I mean, to me, this is almost like, in sports, they always talked about Michael Jordan should have retired after he won the NBA championship. John Elway in football, the Denver Broncos wins the Super Bowl a second time. That's it. People talked about Tom Brady. Tom Brady, he came back. I just mentioned wrestling. Ric Flair. I mean, God, for crying out loud, he's older than you guys in the band. He still keeps wanting to wrestle. You guys, to me, did this as best a way. I don't think any band that I've talked about, Kiss is ruining it again. I mean, we can go on. AC/DC is now a band that's obviously influenced a lot of you guys. They're doing it, and who knows what happens there. And I think, to me, conversely, look at Van Halen. Van Halen didn't get a chance to go end it. Alex Lifeson and Geddy Lee did interviews recently, and you could tell that they wanted to continue, but Neil couldn't. But you guys got it right. To me, you guys ended at the top of your game, and the fans remember you guys the way you should have been.
True. Yeah, in fact, that last show, uh we played that venue like
Oh,
a month.
M3, that was your place. That was like, you talk about Rush in Canada. Sammy Hagar used to always be big in St. Louis. And in M3, that Meredith Pavilion, that was your place. That
Yeah.
was your, like, everywhere else. I don't know, what Kicks would have, capacity wise, but that place, you could always count on you guys would draw thousands. But that last show, September 17, 2023, you guys had almost everything on all cylinders firing.
Yeah, I mean, having played there for M3 like all those years, it was kind of a built-in crowd. And you can't tell how many of the people in the crowd are actually Kicks fans. So doing that last show, just us, it sort of let us know, like, you know, how many Kicks fans we actually had. And it was funny because when after that show was done, I said, man, I said, we should have done this sooner, like a headline our own
Yeah,
show.
it had a great run regardless. I mean, the second half of the band's career, some could say it's, storybook ending. I mean, you go back, starts at Rocklahoma, a decade and a half earlier, and you guys go out there, play all these different festivals. You guys have a second run. Rock Your Faces Off actually was the second highest charting album of your career. The documentary the band releases afterwards hits #1 on the music charts. I mean, you guys had a devoted fan base. I mean, there's no question that people really love Kicks. You guys were kind of like, again, one of those just true cult bands that just, yes, you had Don't Close Your Eyes, but I think it really, to me, this was a storybook ending. I never heard anybody ask you this question, but if you had one or two moments in your career that stood out most, what would they be?
Wow. Well, obviously that last show.
Yeah, that was on my list. I would have to think September 17, 2023 has to be like on, right. You can't go any better than that.
And probably that first Rocklahoma show we did, because that was sort of like we had gotten back together a few times, like we when we with the Resurgence, and that was the first show we booked out of the Baltimore area.
Yeah.
And with that pouring rain and stuff, that was just a magical show.
You guys in rain. I don't know what it was with you guys playing in rain. I don't know what it's just like. I'm in New York, and it's always like New York and Maryland. We almost have like the same weather, so it's just, kind of that way. And I do want to give a shout out to my mother, who's actually a legit fan of you guys, and she's probably covered "Don't Close Your Eyes." And I mean, I always appreciated the message of it. To me, wasn't your typical, 80s ballad. I know it gets lumped into that, but there was a deeper message to that. And I really appreciate it because, in wrestling, we have a lot of issues with mental health. And I think that's like a song to me that really, kind of hits home with like my platform and my supporters.
Yeah. Well, Donnie wrote that song together with Bob Halligan. And it was sort of a personal experience that he had gone through with one of his girlfriends at the time.
Yeah, it was, definitely, a song that, it hits home for a lot of people. And, it was definitely, something that I think a lot of people will always remember the band by. And of course, Bob Halligan, did some work with Judas Priest as well. And, was there ever a band that you wanted to tour with that you didn't get a chance to tour with? I mean, was there ever a band that you like, what, Kicks should have toured with?
Yeah. AC/DC.
I knew you were going to say that. And it's kind of funny that you said that because if I have my timeline right, you were going to tour with AC/DC around the time you were working on the Hotwire record. And this is kind of how thing, right around the time of Hotwire, right around there, you were working on the record, right?
It was either that or Blow My Fuse, one of those two.
Because I heard I read something you were right. I think you did the tour with Blow My Fuse. You ended it. You ended it with Whitesnake. Then you went back into the studio, and I think you got an offer with AC/DC, but you guys had to go and do the record because obviously Blow My Fuse sells, a lot of records, and we're going to have a big one. And it's kind of funny because I had Doug Pinnick on of King's X, and they actually, I don't know if they took your spot, but they actually got to open for AC/DC on the Razor's Edge tour, which, if I have my timeline right, actually would have been right around the time when you were in the studio working on Hotwire. They got the call and they opened for AC/DC on a bunch of dates overseas for the Razor's Edge tour, which was 91. You had Hotwire come out summer 91, and you ended the tour in 90. You came back. So I just kind of thought it was ironic. I have Doug Pinnick on who might have actually got King's X might have got your slot that
Maybe.
you would have had. What a small world. I don't know if that's accurate. Somebody is going to go, oh boy, you just said something crazy there. But we'll have to see that. This is Brian Damage Force. We have a few more minutes with him. He's obviously a very, very busy man. He's with the band Rhino Bucket, which is going to be out there September 20th as a part of the Kicks Fan Fest. I'll put the poster up there. But, I have something for you in the band. I've noticed something that I don't think anybody's given you before. I've heard a lot of different things about Kicks, and Kicks should have had this, Kicks should have had that, Kicks should have had more money, Kicks should have had more things. But I actually have something for you guys that I've actually done. So I'm going to do it here because I have a little thing here. If I'm going to share my screen, and congratulations, because I just put Kicks into the Sportzwire Radio Hall of Fame, because I'm saying, you know what? Why isn't Kicks in any Hall of Fame? Whether it's, I don't know if Maryland has a Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, or, there has to be some kind of Northeast Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, or M3 should like put you guys like a shrine dedicated to you guys. But I'm like, you know what? Let's go the extra mile. let's put you guys here into the Sportswire Radio Hall of Fame. I'll give you the certificate. I'll give it to your management, obviously, when we get off the air. But I'm like, you know what? Let's go the extra mile. And why the heck not? And thank you for all that you do for us here in the music world. And I thought, why don't we recognize you guys? You know, it's kind of about freaking time. Maybe this will let those guys know in Ohio when they have the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame vote next year that they can put you guys in. You know, I don't know, but congratulations.
Wow, thanks. I'm
Yeah,
honored.
yeah, I try to do things differently here. I definitely try to do that here. But obviously, Mr. Forsythe is obviously a part of here the band Kicks. And did you have ever a favorite album to work on of all the albums you worked on? Was there ever one that was like, you know what, I really just that was the album I just loved working on?
I think I mean there were every album had its own experience. It was its own experience. But I think as far as the back in the 80s, my favorite album was Hotwire.
Yeah, I really think Hotwire to me was like that was just I for whatever reason it just came out at the wrong moment. But I feel like that album for me, I think that's probably my favorite album. I mean, I just think sonically, you had it. You just like you had it, and it was just unfortunately, it comes out the summer of 1991. If it came
Right.
out, you know, like a year, if it came out a year earlier, you would have got. You know, there's always a story. Well, if you got two big albums, you had the one, but if it comes out summer of '90, you know, you on your way. The band, you know, never breaks up. But you could look at it and say, you know what? Maybe you wouldn't have had the run that you had in the second act if maybe you had more success because people really hung on to Kicks. It's because again, all these bands, some of these bands you tour with, they've had maybe more albums they've sold, maybe more hits, but they're going to be playing in these places that they're not going to get that moment that you guys had. I think there's a message here that, you know, you guys didn't give up and you guys stayed true to your guns. I never even thought you were more of an 80s band. You guys, to me, were so AC/DC, Led Zeppelin, Aerosmith sounding. I never thought, you know, at least my ear, I didn't see, okay, they sound like Motley. They sound like, you know, I'm not knocking those bands. They're all great bands. You know, I don't think they sound like Def Leppard or certainly Poison. I ain't gonna go there and ask you about that. But I mean, I just always thought you guys should have got, you know, a lot more credit and you sounded differently than maybe a lot of the bands you toured with in the second run.
Yeah, I think that's because we came up well, like we're a little older, and so
Yeah.
we came up through the 60s and 70s, and that's where our influences were. And by the time Van Halen hit, we already established our you know
Yeah.
our style, and most of the 80s bands were influenced by that Van Halen, like
Sure.
finger tapping and wheelie
You
dealy.
guys were more like Angus. You guys were more Joe Perry sounding. You know, Steve was certainly, you know, more of a front man in the vein of, you know, I'd say Robert Plant, Freddie Mercury, you know, things like that. I could definitely see, you know, some of the, I know you're a busy man. I want to ask you two more questions here. And one of those questions to me is always in when it comes to what you guys did as a band, was there any regrets? Anything you regret in terms of what the band did musically or anything like that?
Oh, personally, I wish I would have paid more attention, especially to the business side of things. Um, well, not only the business, but say when we were in the studio, should have been paying more attention to the process, like the mixing and all that stuff. Like I just sort of went in there just with my guitar, not paying attention, and just like nowadays, technically, I'm challenged.
You sound like all the wrestlers that come on here. They go, "Oh, well, you know, I should have been more in tune to what my opponent was telling me, and that kind of why their match wasn't as good." Boy, yeah, you definitely, yeah. I won't talk to you with the WWE guys. It's the same thing. They say, "Well, you know, I should have been paying attention to how many minutes I had in the ring," and they went overtime, and you know, then there was a problem. They went backstage, and well, let's just say the producer, kind of like you guys had a producer in the studio. Well, they shoot him out there. Fair enough. You know, I'm from New York City and I'm from Brooklyn, and I have to ask you about L'Amour's. You have any
Uh,
memories of L'Amour's? I have to ask it to you. You know, my mother saw hundreds of gigs there. I actually do a radio show doing news about 9 blocks from there. So I actually have passed
cool.
by there a lot recently. So any memories of L'Amour?
Oh yeah, I mean we played there all the time. uh, yeah, and you go on like I don't know
2 o'clock
two,
in the morning, right? Like one
yeah,
thirty, 2 o'clock in the morning. Yeah.
and uh, yeah, one of the most the memories that stand out the most is Cinderella opened for us, and before they had their record deal, and they
Yeah.
had all these record executives come down that night to see him, and it wasn't this whole thing. It was like this misunderstanding. The club cut the power, or not that cut the power, but there was this video screen that they lowered down, and I guess Cinderella went over slightly, and they lowered the screen down, and it came down right like it hit Tom Kiefer in the head. So they
Wow.
got off stage and they were pissed at us because they thought we had
Yeah,
something to do.
Steve talked about this on his podcast.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
years, uh, yeah, like when we eventually the next gig we had with those guys a couple of years later, we talked to Tom Kiefer about it, and we told him what really happened. So finally we smoothed it out.
Oh, yeah, I would hope, yeah, because yeah, we don't want to go around that for the next 30, 40 years and saying, oh boy, that just happened there. But yeah, no, obviously, yeah, I heard Steve talk about that on his podcast, and yeah, I could certainly see that being an issue. But yeah, Cinderella, I could definitely see, as a band that you guys would have played with. Yeah, Lemoore was such a interesting place. Obviously, I wasn't alive really in the heyday of Lemoore's, but I heard so much about it, and I passed by it, and I was going to interview you, and I had Randy Jackson of Zebra, and he talked a lot about it. I had Doug on, and he talked about it as well, and I had
Yeah.
to ask you that just because I literally do a radio show in a different genre, like blocks away from there. So I think about it all the time. But yeah, what a place. You could see bands like yourself, and there, and that was certainly the heyday. But Brian Damage Forsythe is a very busy man. He'll be out there September the 20th. I'll put the poster up that before we close the show in a minute or two. And he is also from the influential band Kix, which had their final show September 2023. And yes, they are having their final show. There's no ifs, ands, or buts. I think Steve has been emphatic about that, and you know what? He might have a point. I mean, their last show was in front of almost 15,000 people, and the band went out on top. And as somebody that is in the world of sports, I think there's no better way to go out on top. But Brian will be a part of the band Rhino Bucket. Check them out on Instagram, Facebook. Also, Brian's on Facebook. I'm going to put his Facebook up here shortly as well. And my friend, I like to give you the floor. I want to give you some closing thoughts. Anything else you'd like to share? And I'll put your social media here up as well as we close the show.
Well, yeah, as far as yeah, there's my Instagram.
Yeah, I figured I'd put it up because I noticed you do these podcasts and they never share your social media. So I'm used to just sharing people's social media. So yeah, check them out, and there you go.
Instagram,
You know.
Instagram's mostly food and the stray cats around the house.
You know what? That's a good thing. I've actually, I don't admit it too often, but I've rescued a few, just random luck. I saved like two dogs from getting hit by a car. Two separate situations. So we try here in New York City, but yeah, we love the food, and I hear you're a good cook. I do hear you're a good cook. So, check it all out, and check out the stuff there, and you want to follow Kix. Kix also is on Instagram. So if you want to check out some of the stuff that the band has, Mark and Brian and Jimmy, and they also have some merchandise. Buy the merchandise. Check out the band's posters and their future and whatever else. And I will also put up before we go one more time as a reminder. And I'm thankful for the Kix Fan Fest group for giving me the photo here, because Kix Fan Fest is coming up here again September 20th. And there you go. Rhino Bucket, Blues Vultures. You got some other bands there, and you're going to see some of the guys there, and got some great stuff. $20 at the door. I mean, you can't go wrong with that. Silent auctions, raffles, 50-50, and just some great stuff there. And maybe we'll see, hopefully, again, before we go, maybe there's an unreleased song out there. I don't know. Maybe Hotwire will get remixed. I don't know. Maybe a greatest hits package. We'll have to see. But we'll see. And that, congratulations. And oh, by the way, they're in the Hall of Fame now. That's right. They're in the Hall of Fame, baby. But My friend, thank you so much for all you've done for, I think, everybody in hard rock music, and certainly what you've done for all the Kicks fans, and just for giving me the opportunity. And I really hope to see you here anytime. And thank you for all you do. And I look forward to hearing what Rhino Bucket has to offer soon.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me. It was a pleasure.
It was a lot of fun, and my name is the Reverend Tom Bryce, and alongside me again is Brian Damage Forsythe. He is the guitarist from the band Rhino Bucket, also from the legendary band Kicks, which had 45 years. And that's all, folks. Yep, that's right. They had their last show at September 17, 2023, over there at M3, and almost 15,000 people showed up. And yeah, it can't get any better than that. And of course, the band had the famous song "Don't Close Your Eyes," number 11 on the Billboard Hot 100. Their last album, "Rock Your Face Off," went, oh, by the way, number 49 on the Billboard 200. And you can see some of the stuff they have on their social medias. Check it out. And again, thank you so much, everybody, for tuning in. Like, share, and subscribe this. And good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are, on the number one global radio station where all music matters, Sports Wire Radio. Thank you.